Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching us from. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Mercy Mumba. I'm so excited for our fireside chat for October. And this month, we're talking about becoming a published author, and we're going to look at the A to Z's of becoming a published book author. I have some prolific writers here with me, so excited that they even made time to
Most
meet
welcome,
with
Doc.
us today. And also just to make sure that they share their pearls of wisdom related to how they've been so successful in writing their books and what's the thought process that they go through to make sure that they are publishing good quality books. So before we get started with the introductions, thank you for joining us. If you want to go ahead and put in the chat where you're joining us from. If you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat as well. They'll be happy to answer your questions as we go through this live session. So thank you so much again for being here. Share with your friends, share this live session with your friends, share, comment, like, and all of that good stuff. So before we get started, I want to introduce our guests here today. We have Professor Kenneth Mwenda and Mr. Daniel Cavani. I would like to ask Prof to start with his introduction, just a brief introduction. Who are you? Where do you come from? How did you get here? And then the same thing with you, Daniel, and we'll go into our fireside chat today. So Prof, on to you.
Thank you so much, Doc. Thank you so much, viewers and colleagues, friends. I know most of you we've met on Facebook when I was very active on Facebook. I since left Facebook, I think in 2021. So yes, my name is Kenneth Mwenda. I'm originally from Zambia, though I've been away for the last 30 years or so. First 10 years I was in England as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, and I taught at University of Warwick. Before joining the World Bank here in Washington, D.C. At the same time, I hold academic appointments. I serve as Extraordinary Professor of Law at University of Western Cape, and have also served as Extraordinary Professor of Law at University of Pretoria, in addition to serving as Adjunct Professor of Law at American University here in Washington, D.C. And I taught in the initial stages of my academic career, 1991, 92, I taught at the University of Zambia. And I was back there as a visiting professor, I think 2001. So in a nutshell, that's my background. Yeah, I'm from Zambia. What else? I'm married. My wife is a medical doctor by profession, and yeah, I have a son. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Doc. Mr. Cavani, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Greetings to all the viewers that are joining us today. And it's good to have Prof in the house, and also you, Dr. Mumba. Daniel Cavani are my names. I'm a pharmacist and also an anatomist. My area of specialization is in human anatomy. I'm a publisher. So I head a publishing firm, which is DNK Brand and Publishers. I'm a full-time entrepreneur heading 4 businesses. That's DNK Branded Publishers, DNK General Consultancy, DNK Pharmacies, and DNK Health and Pharmaceuticals. Authored a few books, and so I'm also in the public speaking space, do a lot of public speaking. I am married equally, a husband of 1 wife, and yeah, that should be it about me for now.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today again. And like I shared with you and I shared with our audiences, one of the things that I get asked a lot is how do you become a published author? So I published, unlike you guys who are very well published, I'm published in the academic settings. I do a lot of scientific writing. But in terms of book authorship, I wrote my first book in 2022. And that book did so well, it won the American Journal of Nursing Book of the Year award, which is amazing, out of hundreds of entries. So I was very honored to do that. But when I published that book, a lot of people started asking me, Mercy, how do you write a book? How do you even think about what is a viable idea? and so on and so forth. And I thought, you know what, a lot of what I do is scientific writing. I can write a scientific paper any day without even thinking about it. But in terms of book writing, I said, let me invite some authors who have published multiple books, have experience in this area, and also to look at diverse perspectives in terms of the types of publishing that are out there, the academic publishing in terms of textbooks, the motivational type of publishing, and all of that stuff. So I feel like we have a good panel in terms of the expertise that is here today. And so I want to start by asking you guys, how did you get interested in writing books, and what motivates you in your writing?
Yeah, okay. I'll take the first bite. I think it's writing is something that you have to nurture from an early age when you're pretty young, in university, in college, small pieces, student publications and so forth. You have to nurture that interest. Writing is not something you're going to jump on when you're in your 50s or 60s, and then you say, okay, especially academic scholarly writing, which I'm very familiar with because I haven't been in the fictional world. I'm more of a scholar. So if it's scholarly work, it has to start when you're very young. In my humble view, I've not seen anybody who has turned out to be a great scholar when they started writing in their 50s or 60s. It's almost impossible. You start that when you're pretty young in university, and then you nurture that talent. For fiction writing, it's different. For example, an autobiography, you can write it when you're in your 50s or 60s. You can write a story, that's different. But for scholarly work, the interest has to come when you're pretty much young. Charity begins at home, so they say.
Awesome. Daniel, what are your perspectives?
Thank you. So I started actually thinking of writing at a very young age because as a family, as siblings, we were introduced by mom and dad to books quite young. Each one of us had to be registered to a public library before you actually started school. And just as a family, I think the greatest asset we have are books. Each one of us, with my siblings, we keep quite a wide library. So you realize that the more you read, the more you develop an appetite to actually also write. Because as you are reading and interacting with the ideas written by many other people, you begin to synthesize your own thoughts, your own theories, and things that you may actually want to share. So that's how I got that interest. I should highlight and actually agree with what Prof is sharing, that writing is an art. And just like any other art, it is perfected by practice. So the earlier you begin writing, the better. You improve. The more you write, the more you improve. And I should also mention that if you want to be a successful author in terms of the readership, how wide your readership is, you need to build a brand. Just like I love to look at things from the business perspective, being an entrepreneur. And I should mention that businesses that do well are businesses that have built strong brands. And if you're going to build a strong brand is built over time. So all the popular authors that we know, you're going to realize soon, actually, within the space of publishing, that oftentimes the books that do well may not even be the best books in terms of content. But it is because their authors are well branded, and they're well branded because they started writing a long time ago. So the earlier you begin writing, actually, the better. Thank you.
Yeah, in fact, if I could add to that,
yes,
the
Prof,
point,
go ahead.
Yeah, the point that my brother Daniel has made is very vital in terms of branding. In the initial stages of writing, especially in the academic world, those of you who want to pursue scholarly writing, you'll be rejected. There'll be rejection here and there. You send your paper, it's rejected. No, your ego can be bashed, so you have to be prepared. I wouldn't even say rejection. I would simply say, try knocking on the next door. You could be knocking on the wrong door. Or be patient, attend to the corrections that the editors want you to deal with. But once you brand yourself, once people know you in the market, it becomes much easier. Sometimes your work is not even subjected to excessive scrutiny because they trust your level of competence. They've worked with you before. So that's why it's important to build a brand. And also the culture of libraries. In my time, I went to universities in the 1980s during the Kaunda days. I think a lot of people on social media were not born by then. And we had libraries in Zambia. We used to go to the library. public libraries. Now the culture of libraries is gone. Yes, somebody could say, well, this is a digital economy. Now we have the internet. We don't need the library. You guys were dealing with encyclopedias. Now we have Google. Okay, fine. Granted, we understand. But even the internet, how many people use the internet for, progressive things? You can relax. We're not saying people should always be serious. It's good to relax. I like enjoying myself and a good life too. But there should be time also for writing. Today, for example, I was up by 4 in the morning because I'm working on my autobiography. So I was up on 4 during the pandemic. I've just written a book. It's out. It's on the market. During this time, we've been indoors because of COVID. So utilize your time very effectively. You can have a work-life balance quite all right, but there's also time for seriousness and time for joking and laughing. So that's very important. We've lost that culture of reading. Most of the books, if you look at the bookstores back home in Zambia particularly, we've got a number of books written by Zambian authors, but most of them are fictional, non-scholarly type of material. How many of our academics are writing? And to me, that was a question that really bothered me when I was a student at universities in the 80s. All the textbooks we're using were written by foreigners, apart from 1 or 2 Zambians. So I started wondering, why are Nigerians and Kenyans writing? Zambians are not writing. I think I can fill this void. So it's those type of things where you look for role models. Who can I learn from? I think I admired people like Wole Soyinka as a startup author in the early days, in my early years of writing. I looked up to people like Chinua Achebe, all those guys. They were inspirational. Guys like Professor B.O. Nwabweze from Nigeria, who was the first dean of the law school at University of Zambia in 1966. I think the second or first dean, because there was Professor Kwamena Bensienchio from Ghana. These were prolific scholars. Okay, so you read biographies of these people, you say, I want to be like that guy one day. I want to be like Ngugi wa Thiong'o one day. How can I make it happen? But the role models the role models that we have now are people who are spending cash. So money has taken over, ideas are secondary. But I'm just trying to be as honest as possible.
And so you bring up a really good idea in terms of getting motivation and inspiration for the work that we're doing and how you go by that process. So with that, that's actually a good transition into what I want us to talk about next. How do you move from idea conception to actualization into now a published book? What's that thought process? What are the step-by-step guide that you would give someone in terms of, you have an idea, this is how you create your idea, this is how you package the idea? Because like we're saying, there's a lot of different audiences. How do you even package that idea to fit the audience that you're looking at or you're intending it to actually appeal to? And then how do you move into the writing process?
Maybe let me ask my brother Daniel to take a bite, then I'll come in, because I started on the first question, so that we have a balanced discussion.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, thank you. And Prof has brought up some very interesting stuff about the culture that we are getting now. And probably commenting just about home in terms of Zambia and the writing culture and Africa in general. A few months ago, I was in Johannesburg, and there's a bookstore I love to get my books from, right at Oliver Tambo Airport. It's called Exclusive Bookstore. So I'm going around just looking at the books that are there. Then I noticed one thing. You literally come to find shelves, full shelves, that are packed with Nigerian authors, Ghanaian authors. I would say our brothers and sisters from West Africa are doing well. I was impressed by Zichima Mangozi, who actually literally has almost a full shelf of her books there. And I was looking at the gap between Nigeria and South Africa by distance to see her books packed in there. Then I started searching if I would actually get a book written by a Zambian author, and there was none. At some point, I was looking at one report by UNESCO that looks at how many book titles are done across the world by regions. It would interest you to note that countries like India, for example, does over 200,000 titles annually. Wow. Okay, the UK does over 150,000 titles. China does over 300,000 titles. The US does over 200,000 titles. But Africa, all of it put together, we do less than 50,000 titles. That means we need to promote more the culture of writing, look at what the challenges might actually be, and deal with that. Now, coming back to the question of how do you move from ideation to actualization in terms of the process of actually writing your book? Mm-hmm. Most people tend to think the writing process is very technical. Of course it can, but then you must begin from somewhere. And I think one of the ways is impromptu writing. I would want to call it that. Okay, so you tend, as a writer, you're going to realize that you tend to get moments that I'm going to call moments of inspiration when an idea comes. And if you don't write it down at that very point, you may write it tomorrow, but it will not be phrased as you had it the previous day.
You may even wake up at midnight to write.
Exactly. Exactly. And you know, that's why I feel for authors, literally, you should move. If you are old school, you should always move with a notebook. Yeah. When an idea pops up, you write it down. When some resource you may want to cite pops up, you write it down, you check it out, and all that stuff. In the digital age, it is easier now with our phones and tablets. You could actually keep a little journal in there, which is just some app where you could be writing. At some point, and I should also mention that you're going to realize that if you develop the habit of writing whatever comes, by the end of the year, you would be shocked by how much you have written. And then you begin to just work with this content that you have written to begin to classify it, put it in a genre or anything like that. So one of the ways that you can move from ideation to writing is begin. It also requires discipline. Writing requires a lot of discipline. And I should mention that in a culture now when there's so many competing alternatives to your time in terms of, social media and all these, that discipline can actually be hard where you just sit down. So some people who want to work in a very well-structured way, you can set time when you say, okay, every day from 20 hours to 21 hours will be my writing time. And when that time comes, you sit and you write. So that's one of the ways I think you can actually begin the process.
Yeah. So, Prof, what can you add to that?
Yes. It's important, first of all, one, to identify, those of you who've studied business administration, like Porter's forces, okay? What are the competitive forces in the industry and what are your capabilities, okay? So that's very important. The reason why I say that, I've noticed that there's a trend lately of people trying to publish pretty quickly and pretty young in their careers, okay? Which is fine. We're not stopping people from being innovative, but don't be too ambitious to a point where you want to talk about things you don't even understand.
Okay, especially. So I want you to emphasize that because Prof, you and I were actually talking about this a couple of days ago and how that could actually be detrimental to you in the long term.
Especially in scholarly academic work, not in the fiction area, but in scholarly academic work. I mean, you're a student, you're a law student, you're only in second or third, you want to write a book on contract law. How can that be possible? Okay, no matter how brilliant you are, take your time. It takes a while. I remember, I mean, most scholars, including Zambian scholars, by the time we are writing our first book, we'll have probably finished our PhDs and taught in university. That's the time we start with journal articles. You start slowly with journal articles. After your master's, you journal articles. Then eventually you just can't start an undergrad. You want to write a book on something that you were just studying yesterday. You've not even written a thesis in your life or a dissertation. So it takes a while for you to have that discipline. Okay, I know there's this haste and thirst for fame. People want to be famous, that they are authors, but it's at your detriment, especially if you're going to go into the space of intellectuals. They'll really shoot down your ideas terribly and you'll be embarrassed. So you have to be very, very careful if you want to go into a space of academic writing. Start slowly with academic journals. Academic journals are usually the best way, and they go through scrutiny, peer-reviewed journals. And journals are ranked, okay? It's not just any journal. Journals are ranked, so the top scientific journals and so forth. When you get that discipline of publishing in journals, then you can transition to writing a book. Okay, there are a few people, like, for example, I think Professor Ngugi wa Thiong'o wrote his book River Between in 1964 when he was an undergraduate student, I think at University of Nairobi. But he's a brilliant guy. He's exceptional. You know, there are very few exceptional guys like that. You know, not everybody has that gift. So yeah, so that's a discipline. Secondly, I wanted also to point out that one of the reasons why you see India has high number of volumes of publication, a lot of people use Indian printers to publish their books. It's cheaper. Even top academic presses use India printers to print. There's one book actually that we are working on right now. I can't say much because I'm one of the chapter contributors, but the editors are in Zambia. It's being published by a leading academic publisher in the UK, but the printers are in India. Okay, so that's very common. So they're obviously going to print more. But the cost of publishing in Zambia is sort of a deterrent publishing. It's very expensive to publish in Zambia. The last book that I did, which I wanted to be published in Zambia and was published in Zambia, you know, I had to put in my own resources, I think about $5,000 from my pocket to get that book out. You know, whereas if I'm publishing here in the States, I don't have to fork out any money. Okay, another book I did, which was published by University of Zambia Press, an academic press, I had to fork out about $4,000. You know, so now imagine somebody who's operating in the local economy. Where do you get that money from? Okay, so those are some of the challenges of publishing internally within Zambia. And that's why some of us, we sort of use the international market. But at some point, there are certain, depending on the audience, if I'm writing a book and I know that the main audience is in Zambia, I would want my book to be on the market closely to Zambia, although as well as international on Amazon. I'll look for a Zambian publisher, a credible Zambian publisher. Another point that I wanted to add is the issue of what we call in publishing vanity publishers. Okay, now some of you may not have heard of the word vanity. Vanity means acting in vain. Vanity publishers are people who are just going to ask you for money and then they print your book, even if it's not edited, you know, it's full of grammatical errors and so forth. All they want to do is make money. Now, vanity publishing is very damaging and it can actually destroy your reputation, especially as a scholar. Avoid vanity publishing. You know, if you have to wait, if you have to go through the rigors, it's worthwhile. Don't rush into publishing. So that will be my take on that.
Thank you, Prof. So I like both you and Daniel bring up good points. I like the point where Daniel said, just start. Sometimes you just have to start. And we all get that writer's block. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know why this paper is not going anywhere. I've been sitting on it for days and nothing is coming. And that's fine. But, you know, just push through. And as you're writing, things will start making sense. But I also love the idea, and I'm like that. Sometimes I call it my organized chaos. I have poster notes everywhere because every time I think about something, I write it on a poster note. It may not mean anything to anybody, but I know what it means to me when I pick it up the next time and I'm writing. But writing also requires a lot of research. Can you talk about the process of researching and making sure that we're appropriately citing the sources that we're incorporating in our books so that we're legitimately talking about the ideas that we have brought about in our books? What is that process of research that has to go in? Because sometimes I hear people say, oh, I'm going to take a 2-week break from social media. I'm going to go write a book. And I'm like, I don't know how extraordinary you are, but it did not take me 2 weeks
Right. Yeah, no,
to write my book. So let's talk about that process.
Yeah, great question. One thing that people have to be aware of, especially current and aspiring writers, is the issue of copyright infringement. Okay, intellectual property rights. Avoid plagiarism. Copying ideas, cut and paste from here and there from the internet, you put them in your so-called book. You know, it only takes one search and we'll know that this is fake. These are not your ideas. Okay, be authentic and be honest and be sincere. That's the spirit of writing. A lot of people, including some prominent professors, have been caught up in plagiarism. Now plagiarism has been expanded, including self-plagiarism. Sometimes your own work cannot be repeated in a subsequent work that you write.
Correct.
You can't get credit for it. You know, so that's how strict these things are. And if you're going to write, for example, something where you're making a statement of claim as a fact, empirical data, where did you get that information from? Okay, you can't just say, oh, a study has been shown that XYZ. Which study and who wrote that study? Okay,
Yes.
we need a reference there. So that's a discipline of academic writing. Someone who has been through that will not understand, and they'll just be saying things. You have to back up your data. So that's very important. And if you get into research methodology, you find the sort of primary sources of data, secondary sources of data, and how you're going to collect your data, whether it's questionnaires, interviews, how you select the sample for your audience. There is a methodology to that. Okay, things don't just happen. But yeah, I want to also, relate to what my brother Daniel said. It's very important to write down ideas as they come. There are sometimes, those of you are doing your master's dissertation, writing your master's or your PhD dissertation, you'll be waking up at night at midnight at 01, because this idea has just suddenly come to your mind. And you're so scared that if you go to sleep, you might forget, or it may not be expressed as eloquently as it appears in your mind at that moment. So your husband, if you're married, or your wife will be wondering, what's wrong with you? But we all go through that, but you got to write that something down, and writing is a very personalized experience. It can be lonely sometimes because you're all alone with your thoughts, trying to get your thoughts together, and you need that coherent story. Sometimes you write something halfway, you say, no, this idea should have been at the beginning. So let me switch around the paragraphs. You edit your own work before you even complete writing.
Exactly.
So it's a whole process of just like raising a child. Some days a child will feel sick. You have to go to the clinic. You have to escort your wife, this and that, until the child grows up. But as you mature as a scholar, your writing gets refined more like wine. Even when you write something, say in the newspapers, any person who's been to school, they only have to read the first paragraph. They'll know that the guy knows what he's talking about. The opening sentence itself, the paragraph, will tell you that this is something good stuff that I'm going to read, most likely. Okay, there's a way we can pick up the language that this person is a writer. The way because they've been doing it over and over and over. And as Daniel said, because they read widely, they will know how to open up a paragraph. They will know how to transition to the next paragraph.
Exactly.
Whereas a beginner, you can see the disjointed ideas all over the place, and they need a lot of hand-holding.
And maybe just to come in, Prof has shared quite a lot of great nuggets there that I think would be very important for anybody considering writing. When talking about research prior to you writing your book, I think this challenge is greatest in nonfiction, but self-help kind of writing. You often get people writing either their personal experience or sometimes just general opinion. And maybe I should mention one other thing, which Prof had highlighted of writing too early. Okay, as a publisher, I get to read quite a lot of books because at any given time, we're running quite a number of books. You get a young person who is 21, who is unemployed, does not run a business, and is writing on how to be successful. And you're wondering how to be successful at what? Okay, because his academic credentials may not be those that command, respect. His professional credentials equally might be questionable and all that. And I've often advised young people to say, look, you need to build credibility. Okay, there's something, yes, there is something that is very interesting. When you look at public speaking, much of public speaking is traced back to the writing actually that were done by Aristotle. And he talks about three principles there, which is the pathos, the ethos, and the logos. And when he talks about the ethos, even in public speaking, he says, this is your reputation, which is your credibility. People will only listen to you when they know that you are credible in that area. Now, that is in public speaking, but it is applicable also in writing. And that is why oftentimes when somebody just picks a book, what they want to read quickly, I always tell people that when somebody gets the book, the first thing they do is they glance at the cover and they turn the book behind. They want to read about the author. What gives you the credibility to write on this subject and for us to listen to you? So it is important for authors also to understand that whatever genre you would want to write in, you must begin to build credibility. If you want to be an academic scholarly writer, you must build your academic credentials. If you want to be a nonfiction self-help writer, then build probably your investment profile, build your business. Then you can speak and you can write, and then people can actually be able to listen. Research must be emphasized to anybody that wants to actually write. I think the greatest of writers are those that actually read very, very widely. Whether you're going to be in the academic, those of course in the academic space are often helped by such courses as research methodology. You learn those things. If you're going to write a dissertation, obviously you did literature review, you learn how to cite and all that. But for people that are in the self-help space who may not have actually even probably gone beyond an undergraduate to understand how writing is done, sometimes they can be challenged. That plagiarism comes in. And that is where publishers should come in terms of quality control. And every author must understand that we have publishers and we have printers. These are two different guys. There are people that go to printers and say, I have published a book. Now, a printer is not, when we talk about publishing, publishing has got a cycle. There is a publishing cycle. That cycle includes a number of things. Your book must be typeset, your book must be edited, your book must be proofread. It is through, and at each level of the publishing cycle, there are experts that should do that. Now, I meet young people, old people that go to printers. Then maybe when things go wrong, they come to a publisher like me. And I ask them simple questions. Okay, so who edited your book? And says, oh, my uncle did. I say, oh, what qualifications has got your uncle? He says, no, actually, he's a veterinary doctor. Okay, so your uncle is a vet doctor. He edited your book. He says, yes. Who typeset your book? Says, oh, my aunt. Oh, who designed your cover? My young brother used PowerPoint. So I think our authors must understand, printers simply print. Publishers run your manuscript through the publishing cycle to ensure that quality is maintained through a number of processes that the book must actually go through. Prof talked about vanity publishers. And I should mention this. When you come in a setting such as Africa here, we have what is called traditional publishing and we have what is called self-publishing. Now, the model of traditional publishing is where you give your book to a publisher and the rights of your book, the publisher owns your book, he foots all the costs to publishing your book, and he is going to market and distribute your book and you get royalties. Now, that model works in big economies, okay? Because if you look at the US with a population probably in excess of 300 million, equally, you look here in Africa, we have big economies like Nigeria, which is also talking of people in excess of 200 million. Even if only 5% of that population might be reading, it is big enough for your book to sell. So the publisher might take the traditional route because he knows that he'll still get a return on his investment. Now, when you look at small economies like ours, in terms of even just numbers, Zambia, 20 million people, that tells you that within that 20 million, the reading population is very small. And a publisher cannot get a return on his investment by him pushing money into your project for, printing, distribution, marketing, and all that. So the publishers tend to get the cost and put it on the author. It's self-publishing. Okay, they push that cost on the author. In that case, the author must be ready then to bear the cost that may come with that. But the danger of that is because the publisher understands that the copyrights are not with him, they may not put the rigorous process that is needed to guarantee quality in terms of your work. And that is why this process, like you said, Doc, can be a 2 weeks process and say, no, I'm writing a book, I'm taking a month off, because even at your own personal level, there's so much that you must put in.
Exactly. So I like that we're talking about that. And also, so I've heard some people say, well, I want to write a book. I want to run my ideas by someone, but I'm scared in this world that we live in, someone might just run away with my ideas. How do I protect my ideas while getting some feedback on how to improve my product? What are your what's your advice to somebody in that situation?
Yeah. First of all, copyright law protects ideas even if they are not written down in sort of documented text. You know, copyright deals with not the idea itself, but the expression of the idea. An idea can be expressed differently. So if you take a chance of sharing a draft of your work with somebody, as long as they can express that idea differently, they can overcome the copyright restriction. Okay, it's the expression of the idea that copyright sort of attaches itself to. So one has to be very, very careful there. Secondly, you don't have to worry much as long as you've got your original transcript. If somebody tries to steal your work, you can actually take them to court, you know, for copyright violation because they're trying to steal your ideas. Okay, so there's, you know, the copyright laws, for example, in Zambia are very tight, and we've got international treaties to which Zambia has acceded and signed. You know, they are parties to these. Zambia is a party to these treaties, so that's pretty important. The other thing that I wanted to mention, which my brother Daniel touched on, is the reputation of the author. I'm a culprit myself. I must admit. I must make a self-confession. When I pick up a book, the first thing I do is to look at the bio of the author. Number one thing, who is this guy, and what gives him the authority to talk about what he's talking about? If the bio is not impressive, I will not even open the book.
Oh yeah.
Okay, and I'm not the only one. There are many people who do that. Even if you're going to invite me to a conference, the first thing I'll do is I'll look at the list of people talking. Who are these people? Am I worth sitting, listening to them, spending my 1 hour? Or they should be listening to me? Who's supposed to be listening to the other? Between me and them, I'm going to ask myself that question. If in my judgment, I feel there's no value I'm going to get out of it, I will not show up. It's the same thing you're going to get at weddings. You cannot invite the president to be in the audience and the minister is the guest of honor. It doesn't work like that.
That's true.
There are levels.
There's hierarchy.
There's hierarchy. You cannot invite a general to be in the audience and the colonel is the one addressing the audience. It doesn't work like that. You know, so people need to get this very often. Sometimes I've been invited to conferences. I simply look at the list of people speaking. I said, I'm sorry, I'm not available, even if I'm available, because that's disrespect. Why am I going to sit to listen to those chaps? Okay, people need to earn their respect in society. There are no shortcuts. It's very important.
Can we talk about that just a little bit more? Because I feel like sometimes, you know, and Daniel, he invites all of us to meet him at the top. And I'm like, so some people are trying to jump the steps to get to the top. How can we help them understand?
Doesn't work like that.
that there's a process of getting to the top.
You know, look, I was once invited to a conference on a stock exchange. You know, somebody was talking on the stock exchange. My PhD on the stock exchange. I've written books on the stock exchange. This guy they're calling to talk on the stock exchange is just a practitioner. Okay, and I know his profile. Am I going to sit to listen to this guy? No, that's an insult. You know, so think before you invite somebody. Think. You know, how do we do? There's protocol, there's diplomacy, and there's courtesy in the way you do things. Okay, so it's the same thing with writing. So when we authors are in this space, you know, I'll pick up a book, brilliant idea, it could be from India. If it's not in my field, I don't mind. I'll browse through, you know, just to catch quick ideas. Okay, this is a good book, I'll buy it. But a lot of people, especially technical people, they are very sort of focused on those nuances. If Kotler writes a book in marketing, Professor Kotler, you know, this is Kotler in marketing, okay? If Charles Handy writes a book, those days, understanding organizations and organizational behavior, you know, this is Charles Handy, okay? There are these big names we all know. Bryars and Myers, corporate finance, okay? You know, this is a standard textbook. International law, Ian Brownlee, Churchill professor at Oxford. You know, this, nobody is gonna question that. But you don't come here, nobody, and then you say, principles of international law. Wait a minute, who are you? You know? You know, so we have to be sincere. I remember when I was on Facebook, I had a famous quote which still runs around: people are not honest. You know, we have to be honest with ourselves, you know? So yeah.
What do you
Just to
have to
come
add
in,
to that, Daniel? Great discussion.
yes, I think that's very important. And you see, oftentimes dealing with authors, I get people that come to complain and say, my book is not doing very well. Okay, my book is not doing very well. But like we are saying, it goes to the credibility. It goes to the credibility. That's why you've seen there are authors who launch their book today and they sell millions of copies within a week. And another person could be struggling. People always want to verify and look and say, what qualifications have you got? And I tell people that there are two things that should determine whether you can write on a field. One are your qualifications. Two is your experience, right? If I'm going to pick a field, for example, which is business, you can either write on business because you are an academician with qualifications in business. You are teaching at a university, you hold your PhD, you are a professor, a postdoc within business. You can write and people will listen. Why? You have earned the right. Or then if you don't want to be a scholar, then make yourself an accomplished businessman. Because look, if somebody is going to stand like, say, Lawrence Kutwa, okay, and write a book, Tony Elumelu, write a book on business, Strive Masiwa, his qualifications are in engineering. But if he writes a book on business, it is going to sell because this is an accomplished businessman. He has demonstrated whatever he might want to be writing. So this is very important to be understood. And you talked about process. We are living in a time that I think people want to have microwave strategies to almost anything. But you see, you may be able actually to shortcut things, but there's a level at which natural laws probably will not allow. There's a process. And every person who is serious with anything that they want to do, they must understand that the quality of what you get is by the process that it has gone through. You must be willing to commit yourself to a specific field, to fully give yourself to it, actually to get results that will be respected by people that might be listening to what you want to actually share.
Yeah, in fact, if I could add, if you look at great sportsmen, okay, because I've been an educationist from 1991. I think I've been doing this for over 3 decades or so. If you look at great sportsmen like Ronaldo, Messi, Muhammad Ali, Maradona, Pele, even our own Kalusha Bwalia, Charles Musonda, there's one unique common characteristic of all these three, all these people that I've mentioned. They all strive for continuous improvement.
Exactly.
There were no shortcuts. They didn't just come and Kalusha Bwalia started from secondary school, made it at Blackpool, made it at Mufulira Wanderers, made it at national team level, went to Cercle Brugge in Belgium, went to PSV, then he went to Club America in Mexico. There is a step, there's a process before he got to that level. You don't just jump from nowhere and then you say, I also want to be Africa Footballer of the Year. It can't work like that. There's a process. Messi, if you look at Messi's training, it's rigorous. He's always perfecting his art. Muhammad Ali, it was the same. Pele, it was the same. Look at Ronaldo. Same thing. These guys have been working consistently. Mbappe at PSG, it's the same thing. But we have
like
a lot of
the discussion, Prof, about continuous improvement. I think that sometimes people think that once they do one thing that is great or excellent, that is the end, and they've established their credibility based on that one-time thing that they've done. So yes, let's encourage that continuous improvement, because there's always something to learn. And I think that going back to the issue of being well-read, in order to be a good writer, you have to be well-read. That means you just don't sit and not know what else other people are writing about, because it does actually translate to how well you can write. It does translate to how well you can communicate your idea. You can have a great idea, but if you're struggling in actually telling the story, that idea is going to be so disjointed that people are not going to buy into what you're actually trying to do. So I love that you bring up that issue of continuous improvement.
I like soccer. I like football. I used to play soccer when I was young at university, and I've been following soccer for a very long time. But even at my level, I went back to school to study soccer coaching with Barcelona FC last year, because I want, when I'm watching soccer and people are making commentaries, I want informed, intelligent commentaries. I don't want to be sharing ignorance. You're seated with guys sharing ignorance in a pub and you're listening to that. No. So I went to study soccer so that I can understand it scientifically, at my level. Last year I was in school studying soccer coaching. So it's that discipline of continuous learning. I've been doing a lot of executive programs, even at my level. I'm a professor, but I was at Harvard doing executive programs. You don't stop learning. There's no end to learning. Even professors themselves, they perfect their skills, as a professor. That's why they do research, to discover new knowledge, So this thing of being content that I've got a degree, and then you sit, you put it, you're looking at your degree on the wall and your graduation gown, you think you've arrived. No, there's no arriving in life.
And I just want to come in with on what
Daniel,
Prof
I was
has
actually
mentioned.
going to say, Daniel, I want you to comment on something.
One of my favorite Ghanaian writers is a man by the name of Dr. Samuel Corantine Pipim. He comes with a background in engineering, then later on went into theology, systematic theology. There's one quote he shares which says, excellence is not a destination. Excellence is a journey.
Yes.
You don't arrive, you continue to improve yourself. And I remember quite young reading, I liked reading biographies, especially of great people. One of them that I read was the biography of Michelangelo, one of the great artists and painters and sculptor way back. He had a motto in Latin, I think it says something like Ancora Imparo, something like that. But what that motto meant was ever learning.
Correct.
You must commit yourself to ever learning. When you look at all the great people of all time, knowledge is a competitive advantage.
Yep.
Okay, you look at one of the great presidents of the United States, highlights and he says, "My best friend is one who can give me a book that I have not read." But if you go in any field, the people.
Wait, is it me?
Yeah, no, I think we're losing Daniel, so I can come in whilst we're waiting to get him back.
Oh,
sorry,
he's
about
back.
that.
He's back. Yeah.
Okay, you're back.
Yes. So I was highlighting that in any field and continuous. I think professions have taken this for professions now.
Yes, they call it continuous professional development, CPD. You have to be relicensed. For example, if you're a certified anti-money laundering specialist, you have to demonstrate. If you're an accountant, chartered accountant, you have to demonstrate CPD. CPD, yeah, you can't run away from it.
Exactly.
And just to touch on the point that Daniel was raising, as a young high school student, I still remember we used to read African writers series for a literature subject, Form 4, Form 5, which was grade 11, grade 12 today. If you look at those books which were published in the UK by Heinemann, African Writers Series, just the bio at the background, that was very inspirational. People who wrote those books were not jokers. They had CVs, proper CVs. You look at Chinua Achebe, you look at the Wole Soyinka, the Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and a number of other Kenyans who were in that space. Then you've got the Kamara Lai, you've got, what was this Elecha Madi, the concubine. Those books were written by guys, some of them were teachers, but they'd been to school. You could actually tell that these guys are well exposed. Okay, so we've lost that culture somewhat. Like you were saying, Daniel, you get somebody, he's unemployed, hasn't been to school, he tells you he wants to write a book. Fine, we are not disrespecting anybody, but do you have what it takes to write a book?
Yeah.
It's not discrimination. Yeah.
Prof, I thought to come in and mention that in academic writing, if you are going to decide to do a research proposal, your research proposal should clearly indicate what knowledge gap you identified.
Right. And limitations of the study.
Yes, exactly. So that requires you to have done a literature review.
Yes.
Then you have identified a knowledge gap that you want to address. And this is what most people should realize when it comes to writing. The question is, what knowledge gap are you have you identified? What new knowledge are you bringing to the table? Because if you have not identified the knowledge gap, chances are high that you are parroting other people's ideas. You're plagiarizing works that have already been done.
Yeah.
And that is why it must begin with you reading. You cannot come to the table and say you are writing when you have read nothing, because what you might think is novel, it might just be novel because you are ignorant.
Exactly.
If you read, you'd actually realize that what you want to write is already written. And therefore your writing is a mere waste of time, because probably the one with better credentials has already written on that subject. So you need to read very widely, identify the gaps, then you bring in this new knowledge that you want to bring to the table. And as an author, in whatever industry, the space that you pick, you must ensure that you have read the top leading minds of that industry.
Exactly.
If you're going to write about pathology, you're going to write about anatomy, you're writing a textbook on anatomy, you have not read Gray's Anatomy, you have not read Grant's. Those are the leading minds in the space of anatomy. What are you writing?
Exactly.
If you're going to pick a book on economics, you must read the leading minds in there, so that, because you see, you don't want to come and write a book that brings information that is at variance with the leading minds, and yet you don't have the credentials that match what the leading minds in that area have actually put out.
Partly,
that
I think,
is such a great point.
Yeah, and partly this problem, I think, has come with social media. For example, and with all due respect to everybody, you're looking at an economic issues and you say, okay, I want an opinion on how the economy is doing. You've got social media, Facebook economists, and you've got university professors teaching that in the Department of Economics at UNZA. Why can't you go to UNZA and get learned, informed opinions instead of sitting on Facebook and listening to somebody who's just doing guesswork from Wikipedia or stuff like that? Okay, so, but these are the people we think are thought leaders, because they're always on Facebook making noise on Facebook, and Twitter.
So with that, Prof, you actually bring up, not to interrupt you, but you actually bring up a good topic. In today's world of AI, how are we establishing expertise? Because now you have ChatGPT can spit out all kinds of stuff. And now you have people who feel empowered to write on topics that they are not knowledgeable about.
I used to be on Facebook, okay? I had a huge following on Facebook. I'm a lawyer by profession, but I never used to discuss or analyze law on Facebook. And I made that point very clear, because Facebook is not a forum or a platform for me to be doing my legal analysis. If you want to read my works, go in the library, they are there, okay? So people who sometimes pretend to be experts are the ones you're gonna find on these social media platforms making noise. The real experts are not there. The real experts rarely use it. They know where to push their ideas, okay? Like the scholars, they can have a Facebook page or a LinkedIn page, but they won't put in much stuff. But you see, if you go in the journals, you consult them, they'll give you the information. So when you're doing research, you want to get primary data, for example, go to the right people, talk to the right people. Even when you are giving these so-called awards and stuff like that, you're busy picking people from Facebook. Okay, these are not some of the most accomplished characters. There are people there in universities doing serious things. They don't just make noise, huh? So think outside the box, okay? My generation, like I said, I went to university in the 1980s. Some of the people that taught me who are still alive in Zambia, I've never seen them being honored, who I respect a lot, but I will not mention their names. Really accomplished people, both men and women. But because they're not on social media, the young people today don't know them. They just know these little small wannabes.
So Daniel, comment on the AI process and how do we still establish discipline for people to still know their stuff, even in this new era of new knowledge acquisition we're living in?
So I came across a very interesting quote that I shared. I'm currently in Livingston, speaking at the AGM for the internal auditors. And I came across an interesting quote that says, well, a machine can replace 50 ordinary men, but no machine can replace one extraordinary man. Now, I found that
Amazing.
very, very interesting. Okay. I may not be an AI expert. Of course, I've been having a lot of interesting conversations around the AI because my general manager actually holds a master's in artificial intelligence and robotics. So we normally have these conversations to try and understand how this AI and everything is going to play out. One of the things that continues to be highlighted is that there's a certain level of human ingenuity that cannot be replaced by machines. It goes probably to our wiring at a physiological and anatomical level, that there are certain things that may not just be replaced. And however, I should quickly mention that while we have tools that are being developed to do certain works, for example, in writing now, most academic institutions are asking themselves, in the advent of AI, how do we stop plagiarism? How do we not produce students that are simply punching in topics in these apps and things are coming out? So on the other side, you have people that are developing applications that actually can run material and establish and say, this was generated by AI.
Right.
Okay, so we are still within that space also where actually it can be picked. At some point, I think it used to be very hard to know whether one has plagiarized because it depended on how well read the person reviewing the work did. But we know that right now we have applications through which you can just run a document and it's a plagiarism checker, right? It is going to highlight clearly how much of that work has been plagiarized and exactly where it came from. Of course, the discussion also must look at saying AI in itself is not an evil. How do we complement this to what we are doing to enhance, to actually enhance the work that we'll be doing? So I think it will be an interesting conversation to see how it unfolds with time on how AI can actually be used to synergize the process of writing. And on the other side, again, also to stop people that can just begin to mix stuff. I thought of commenting on also something that Prof actually used, which is a culture that I think we should not promote. I've often also wondered when I look at sometimes awards given, including even in the publishing circle, in Zambia, across Africa, across the world, there are many platforms that give these awards. Best writer in what? Best writer in what? We are moving to a culture of popularism. We look at the most popular person and we award.
Yes.
I was looking, I think there's some awards that are coming up, and I think on the list there are people really that have done great stuff, but also there are certain people you say, okay, but what has this person, okay. You look at disciplines, like I think the awards being given in the discipline of medicine, I was looking at some point, I have not seen men like the late Professor Mkonke being awarded. I have not seen Professor Angelesan. I have not seen Professor Lambert being awarded. Now, these are pioneers of medicine.
When we were students in the university, some of the people, now that you've mentioned a few names, I'll just mention, for example, Dr. Mabel Milimo in the field of gender studies. She's one of the pioneers at the university there, you know. We've got Dr. Musonda Lemba in demography. These are guys who've taught these people who are now picking up awards because their friends are setting up these forums to give each other awards, you know, that sort of thing. Okay. Now, for me, it's not a question of awards. If I'm going to get an award, I should deserve it. If I don't deserve it, don't give me that award. Okay. My latest award, which I got, Oxford University honored me. I didn't have to lobby for that. Okay. You don't lobby for things. Oxford itself picked my name, say you deserve this highest honor. So that's how you get an award, because your work is there. It speaks for you, not because your friends are the ones who are organizing that and you're lobbying in the background. Okay, that's important. Now, the other thing I wanted to touch on is artificial intelligence. Basically, this builds from the earlier in work in development economics or development studies, capital intensive technology versus labor intensive technology. AI is in the capital intensive domain. And one of the dangers of AI today is that it will render a lot of people's jobs redundant. Okay, so even if we are pushing AI, we have to be very careful, including the publishers. You have to be very careful because it can steal your business ultimately.
That's true.
Even doctors have to rethink, you know, some of the procedures and processes, because we may not need a lot of doctors in hospitals.
That's true.
Lawyers are not spared. Some of these documents that we use for conveyancing, AI can generate those documents, and we don't need many lawyers and paralegals. Okay, all I need is the right software. So we have to strike a balance between labor intensity and capital intensity in terms of the technology that we are adapting. Yes, it's good to innovate, it's good to move forward, but let's move at the right pace, especially in Africa where we're trying to create jobs. Let's not automate systems too quickly. Okay, because otherwise people will be declared redundant.
That's true.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears. Go ahead. Finish your thought, Daniel, and then I'll ask us to switch gears a little bit.
I just wanted to agree with Prof. I was looking at one report actually by I think it's the IMF, no, International Labour Organization, that we're projecting that by 2050 we should have over 600 million youths within the bracket of those that are employable without jobs here in Africa. That's a bubble that is waiting to actually burst. I should mention that actually publishing authorship also contributes to the job market. It creates employment. And yes, we should be very careful with how we are going on with automation. A lot of things might actually be phased out. But I strongly believe still that there is a level of human ingenuity that machines will not replace. We must look at how we can harness that and promote that.
You know,
so for our viewers, I got a question about how do we ask questions. Go ahead and put your questions in the comments and I will read them as we get closer to winding down our discussion. This has been a wonderful discussion, but I want us to also talk about how do we internationalize our ideas while still remaining locally relevant to where we are. It's important to be locally relevant in the writing that we're doing, but how do we still appeal to international audiences so that we're becoming a global brand outside of the four walls of our country where we're currently living, and so on and so forth?
Okay, yeah, good question. Number one thing is positioning. You need to position yourself in the right market. You need to place yourself where you're visible within the global community. Because if you position yourself in a narrow space or in a parochial insular space where you cannot be seen, you're not visible, nobody's going to see your ideas. What do I mean by this? When I started off as a scholar, as I said, I taught at University of Zambia 1991 and 92, and I left Zambia. But I stayed on in England after my studies. I started teaching as an assistant professor at Warwick University, which is one of the top 10 schools there. That platform, I thank Warwick for giving me that space, helped me to sort of get myself known in the international space. And also when I write, unlike a number of my friends, with all due respect, who just want to write on Africa or Zambia, they are so comfortable just writing on Zambian things. Some of the books that I've written have got nothing to do with Zambia. I write on Europe and Central Asia. If white people can write about you, why can't you write about them? What are you afraid of?
That's a good one.
Why do you always want to write about Africa, 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 Africa? To a point where when people look at you, they will just say all he knows is Africa, nothing else. Yeah, because that's how you've defined yourself.
That's true.
So I've written books about the comparative study of higher education in the US and the UK. Okay, so that Africans and others can learn from this. You know, why are we scared of writing about other cultures? We are just so comfortable with our own things. You know, so it's that thing, you know, when you focus so much, you narrow your perspectives and you just revolve around Africa, you'll be associated with Africa. You're not a global scholar, you're just an African scholar. So be broad. And of course, especially for academicians, there's a tendency to write on everything and anything. No, you have a niche in your field. This is my area of expertise, okay? Don't just be writing randomly. Be strategic, okay? For example, I'm a corporate and securities lawyer. That's my main aim. My secondary field is international law. Okay, that's where you're gonna find me. You won't find me discussing the Constitution. That's none of my business. I'm not interested. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I'm a corporate and securities guy and international lawyer. Ask me about international law, what's going on in Ukraine, I will explain. Ask me about what's going on in Israel, I'll explain. Yes, it doesn't mean I don't understand the Constitution. I do. but that's not my area of expertise or specialty. So there's a tendency for people sometimes, especially young lawyers, to want to opine on everything. You can't be an expert on all subjects. It's not possible. You know, the higher you go, we specialize.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Daniel, what are your thoughts about internationalizing your work while still remaining locally relevant?
Okay. Both sides actually, you know, it's a seesaw and it requires quite a good balance. Maybe let me begin first by, you know, works that are relevant to the local context. And this is why I am an advocate of actually getting much of our local authors publishing. For the simple reason that if I cite an example, in the case of medicine and its practice, we have a concept of individual variation within the space of health sciences. If you look at medicines in terms of maybe the line of discipline which we call pharmacology, you're going to realize that drug response in the Caucasians for specific medicines is very different from drug response for Blacks. And that is why there are certain medicines actually that we would give to Blacks that we don't give to Caucasians as the drugs of first choice. It is because of individual variation. If we go to disease presentation, there is a difference in how malaria presents in a white person and how it presents in the Black person. And I feel that there is enough room for misdiagnosis when people are reading books that are written with a white patient in mind to treat a Black person. Let me give you a typical example. If you are asphyxiated, which means you are failing to get enough air to breathe in, and you are a white person, you are going to turn bluish black. It is because your blood is not oxygenating enough. It is becoming deoxygenated. So that presents with a blue-black appearance. And every medical textbook will tell you that. So if a baby is born, is asphyxiated, this is what you're going to see. If a patient is undergoing what we call cyanosis, this is what you're going to see. Now, I should mention that you don't see that in a person as dark as me. Now, if that is what you have been reading, because all your literature is Western literature without a context, because Western literature is written actually with a white patient in mind.
Exactly.
But our Zimbabwe trained doctors who are reading these books, how then do they interact with the patient and be able to see this in a patient? Now, that's just an example I'm using for one discipline, but it is applicable across board.
In fact, let me jump in. Yeah, we call it in education, we call it variable learning. Okay, when you're as a soccer coach, for example, you can expose soccer players to basketball so that they see how LeBron James performs and you know how he moves around. They can learn that and then use that as transferable skills to the soccer pitch by parity of reasoning, like you've explained very well. Even when you're looking at our constitutions, some of these notions and norms of Western democracies were picked from the Western world, which countries actually went through a very authoritarian and brutal system of slavery to get to where they are. The Western world did not start on the basis of democracy. It was very dictatorial. It was slavery, okay? Very crude. But we are in our nascent phase of development, and then we just want to jump the queue and also pick up these notions of we got to be very careful. You know, that's not how things are done. You can have a very superficial understanding of things at undergraduate level, but you lack that epistemological, philosophical understanding of the foundations of knowledge, where things started from and how they started. So it speaks exactly to what Daniel is saying. The copy and paste model doesn't work well.
Does not work.
You can use analogies from different disciplines. You can be a lawyer, but look at what they're doing in medicine. That is why, for me as a scholar, some of the people that I respect and who I follow are people like football players. I spoke about Messi. I like Messi. I have a lot of respect. Ronaldo, Kalusha Bwalia, Charles Musonda. These guys have done phenomenal things. Loti Mwale, Muhammad Ali, you know, Mike Tyson. I learn a lot from these guys because the way they maneuver on the pitch helps me understand how I can maneuver in my own space. We call those transferable skills. Don't shun a discipline to say, no, I can't learn from this one. No. Even the street guy, when I'm in Zambia, I like to talk to street boys. I can tell you, a street boy will tell me more about the Zambian economy than a PhD economist will tell me. because the street boy will say it the way it is.
Exactly.
Oh, big man, we are having these problems. The PhD guy will start drawing graphs. I'm not interested in those things. The street boy will tell me the real stuff. Then I, as an intellectual, would then internalize that and, you know, process that information. So when you are getting lessons of experience, have an eclectic taste of where you can get inspiration from. Okay, even as a scholar, if you want to be an academician, don't restrict yourself to academics. Listen to music, listen to jazz. Miles Davis, follow jazz. You know, if you you know, those who listen, Miles Davis was in a space of his own. Okay, Michael Jackson, you know, the dancing, you know, you can learn something from that, you know.
You may actually draw quite a lot of inspiration by I think, like Prof is saying, it should not be a silo approach.
Yes.
And you see, you can actually tell a well-read or a well-exposed mind in a book. Just when you read, you can see the exposure. We must draw inspiration from a wide range. And I was highlighting on adaptation. Whatever we, especially African scholars, African writers, we must learn. Why am I speaking this? You may read certain books. Even let me go to books that are self-help, because that's an area in which I'm writing quite widely. There are books written by Robert Kiyosaki and many others on business. Some of them are writing books in the context of economies that run on different laws and principles than what we do. Let me just give an example. If you use the word mortgage within the Zambian context, it's a very foreign thing. But I think if you show up in the US and mention the word mortgage, almost everybody understands what that means. Now, if you're going to write a book on business, and this is what you are writing, you write a business on financing, you are just copying from the Western culture about financing, you know, business financing. When you come to the African context of business financing, and in your book, you're talking about venture capital firms. Question, how many venture capital firms do we have within the African context? So that book becomes irrelevant because it is citing things that may not be reproducible within our context. However, we should again run away from what Prof has highlighted, where you are a purely local guy who is only relevant to the local context. You're a village champion, in other words. No. But the question is, how do we then make our works international? I think one of the ways is collaboration. And this is something that authors must understand. When you pick most of the books that are written from the Western context, you see a lot of collaboration. You can pick a book that have 15 people that have contributed to it. Most of our books, you find a sole author, just one person who has written a 500 pages. And that becomes challenging. But you see, even from the point of marketing, if you wrote a book, you have contributors, one from the US, one from the UK, one from China. That means your book begins to easily penetrate the Chinese market. It penetrates the UK market. So collaboration is one of the great ways in which we can make our works actually international. Musicians understand this very well. You're going to find some local musician collaborating, some Zambian musician collaborating with a guy from Nigeria, from Ghana, from Kenya. We must see this happening within the space of writing, collaboration. Away from collaboration, another thing we need to see is mentorship. Mentorship is critical. Just as you get mentorship, if you go in science, you go to philosophy, you know that there was a relationship between Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates of mentorship. You go in science, you look at the Isaac Newtons and all these guys, they were mentored. When it comes in the space of writing also, you see, mentorship brings in borrowed credibility. If you have a person who has already accomplished within that field, they are mentoring you, they write your forward. You have seen there are certain books that will just sell because of who has actually written the forward to that book. So those are some of the things that we can actually, I think, bring to the table.
Wow. Okay. So this is a lot of great information to ponder. I cannot believe we're already like 16 minutes over our time and the audience is just as engaged. I so appreciate you being here today. But as we wrap up, I know like we could talk about this the whole day. Great insights. Thank you so much. But if you were to give our viewers, our audience, just your top three advice for becoming a published author that is credible, that can bring good ideas to the market, and that is not just going to be locally relevant, but internationally impactful as well. What are your top three things? We'll start with Prof and then we'll end with Daniel, and then just some closing remarks from there.
I think the number one fundamental thing is passion. You gotta have a passion for what you do. There are people who write to make money, especially fiction stories, and they make a lot of money. Those of us who write academic work, we don't make much money in our books. They don't sell much. Sometimes we even spend money, so you gotta have a passion for what you're doing. As you know, I teach at various universities out in Africa, including in Zambia, supervising PhD students. Okay, this is not for making money. This is to help our people. Okay, because if I wanted to make money, I would charge quite a lot, of course, for them to get me there. But that's not the whole idea. It has to come from within. You have a passion for that. Secondly, there is need for honesty. Okay, and when I talk about honesty, it's about integrity. There are no shortcuts to fame. Okay, you're not just going to write 2-3 things you put together and call them a book. Look for a printer, and you say you're an author because you want to be famous. It doesn't work like that. Okay, you must earn your respect. Okay,
yes.
If you want to write in the academic space, go to school, get your first degree, get your master's, decent things, and then think about writing. Don't just try to do shortcuts. So I've spoken about the initial idea, which is a passion. Then this issue of honesty and integrity is very important. Then to tap up probably on the third point that I'll touch on, I'll talk about strategic thinking, not management. There's a difference between strategic management and strategic thinking. Strategic thinking is where you generate options continuously. You don't stop. You can have strategic plans in management, strategic plans, this is what we want to, but strategic thinking is broader than that. So be strategic, and it builds on what my brother Daniel was saying, build partnerships. Partnerships are very important because the bigger names will introduce you into a market. Okay, I want to write with my supervisor, is my PhD supervisor, because he knows XYZ in that journal, we can get published. Most PhD students in the natural sciences, their first publications are co-authored with their supervisors. So that's a typical example. Okay, that's very important. But as you grow, as you mature as a scholar, okay, as you grow, as you mature, we sometimes do things, especially in the social sciences, on our own. Okay, for example, when I was applying for my higher doctorate at Rhodes University, the university had never awarded that degree before. Higher doctorate. It was the first time, 2007. They asked me specifically to say, we want to see works which are your own authored works. We don't want you to write on other people's works. Okay, so which means I had to exclude any co-authored works. All they wanted to see were my ideas to prove that I'm an authority. So the higher you grow, you have to be very strategic. Certain works, you have to do them alone because you need those to be assessed as an individual. These are my works. Because we don't know how much other people have contributed. I know in the natural sciences, there's a tendency of people being like 12, 14 on one journal article, and it generates
even 20, 40. Some of you are in the Ito series.
No, I've seen that stuff. I've seen that stuff. So that's why I started with honesty initially. Now the reason why they do that, they want to generate the H index. Okay?
Exactly.
So if you're 20 of you, you're citing each other, each one of you writes a paper and you cite each other, you generate 20 articles at one time. It's a bit dishonest. It's academic dishonest in my view, compared to a friend of yours who wrote all by himself, a monograph. This is his own book from the first beginning to the end as Kenneth Mwenda alone. Okay, it's different from a guy who has 4 co-authors on that book. Because even when I'm assessing him for promotion, if I'm sitting on a promotion committee, I'll say, to what extent did you contribute to this book?
To this book.
Okay, because you can't tell me that this will be the other authors there. So that's why I spoke of strategic thinking. Be strategic. What instruments do you use at a certain level when you're starting off or when you become so advanced, and for which market? Okay, so in a nutshell, to repeat, I spoke initially about the passion. You have to have the passion factor yourself, and then the
Yes.
issue of honesty and integrity, and then be strategic in your thought process. Which market am I targeting? What do I want to achieve? What do I want to get out of this? Is this about money, or is this about fame, or is this I want to leave a legacy after my life to say this is what he gave the world, and my name will remain in perpetuity.
Awesome. Daniel, top 3 things.
Those are great insights, Prof. Very great nuggets to actually take home. And interestingly, on my list, also the first one I was saying, you must have a genuine motive. What is your motive for writing? You know, any motives that are not really focused at giving back and improving people rarely live long. They rarely, you know, this chase after fame is not only limited actually to the publishing world in terms of authors. It goes to anything. I think you're going to realize that if you go in the music industry now, there's still names we're still talking of: the Beethoven, the Mozart, the Handel. These guys did compositions in the 1400s.
Yeah.
And their compositions live on. If you're going to go in hymnology there, you're going to find the Isaac Watts and many others whose compositions up to now, the Fanny J. Grosby and many others, their compositions up to now are still alive. But then you get a crop of musicians whose song has a shelf life of 3 months.
Exactly.
Where is the problem?
Yeah.
It is because people run around, look for a beat, add 1 or 2 words and say the song is here. So we must invest in whatever we are going to produce, whether it's a book, it is a song or anything like that. Look at the issue of what is the driving factor, your motive. Within the context of that credibility, which we have already talked about. I'll give an example. I've been at public speaking now for, I think, over 20 years, professional public speaking now for maybe 15 or so. And I wrote nothing about public speaking. And yet, on average, I am speaking to in excess of 200,000 people annually. Okay, literally my itinerary is bumper to bumper packed in public speaking. And I wrote nothing. It is only this year that I decided I can write. Well, people would say, we can listen to this guy. We have seen him. We have heard him. We have seen him at that conference and there. So he has something. You have demonstrated capacity and credibility. So for any person, especially young people, begin to build your credibility on any discipline as quickly as you can. And don't rush the process. Don't hatch your eggs too early. Build your case. Later on, you can do that. Number 2, I would want to re-emphasize the issue of reading. You can't be an author who does not read. You might be thinking what you have is novel, and yet it is only novel to you because you are ignorant. So read and read and read, then you can publish. That I will still emphasize. And lastly, I would want to say, your approach to publishing, you see, we write for impact, but your impact must also be deliberate. Whether you're going to pick the case of Jesus Christ, who had a mission to come and do, he had to be deliberate. He had to have a strategy to how he is going to market his message, and did what he did. If you want your works to be exposed as an author, your books also to sell, it is not only limited to content. You must have a marketing plan for your works. You must have a distribution plan for your books. A book is a product, just like any other product that you may look at in business. So you must have a business plan to that. Before you sit and write, a business plan will tell you that you need to do a feasibility study. Have you done a feasibility study over the book you want to write? Is there demand for what you want to write on? Is there a market that is ready to consume what you actually want to write? You must do a SWOT analysis. What are the threats? What are the opportunities, whatever, to this book that you actually want to push out? So there must be a plan. There are people who have written books. The book is not selling. Next, you see articles of frustration to say people are not supporting, they are jealous and all that. No, you just don't have a strategy to what you are doing. So it is very important that strategic thinking actually comes in. I think those are the 3 that I would actually share. And maybe I should also mention that in a digital era like this one, you must be digitally elite. Yes. Okay? there is evolution happening within the space of writing. Okay, books are moving to become audio, to become visual, and all that. How are you also beginning to actually change your content to become relevant within the digital spaces? How are you finding yourself in those spaces? I think that's what I would share on that.
Yeah. Dr. Mumba, if just one thing I wanted to share before we
Go
close.
ahead, Prof.
I wanted to encourage, especially we have a lot of brilliant minds back home. But most of them, they don't come forward. So they've left a space to, these people who sort of fill the gap and pretend to be experts. We have a lot of knowledgeable people, but there's a theory in psychology, the Kruger-Dunning syndrome, where highly accomplished people doubt themselves to a point where you allow space now for these guys who are just courageous to fill the space and masquerade. Okay, so you only blame yourselves. Okay, so we have a lot of well-educated people, top economists, but they don't speak up.
That's true.
You have to go to them to say, but why can't you speak up? You are allowing these guys to fill the space. I know me, I don't want to be seen with this. No, maybe they'll think like, we have allowed room and space for pretenders to come to the front. Okay, I don't want to use the word charlatans, but for pretenders to come to the front. Okay, because the guys who know the stuff, they're sort of drawn back, but they're there. We have a lot of people who know the stuff back home in Zambia. They're there. Even writing, it's the same thing. There are guys who very well, because this guy maybe was your professor, he taught you, or you were together at university, he went to a good school, but he's such a conservative guy, or what's the word, an introvert. Okay, he doesn't step out of his comfort zone. Then you have these guys who just make noise on social media. They fill the space.
That's amazing. Wow. Okay, so I don't know if you're able to see the comments, but everyone is like, please keep going. And I'm like, this is so good. This is so good. On a Saturday afternoon, they're like, I need to bring you back because we have not exhausted this topic at all.
It will be an honor. Yes, it will be an honor.
No, it would be. Sure.
Yeah. And I just want to wish everybody in Zambia a happy Independence Day. We may not talk before that. I'm going to an independence function to support the Zambian community here. I was invited to a barbecue. So it's about 13 hours here. It's going to be about 16 hours. So I still have some time.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes. Well, enjoy the Independence Day celebration. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you're going to be watching this later, I really appreciate you tuning in even after the live broadcast. I hope that there's so many pearls that you have learned from these wonderful individuals that we had here, Professor Kenneth Mwenda and Mr. Daniel Kalani. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your pearls, and just your candor in how you related this information. So for everybody who's here live with us, thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode of our Fireside Chat, which will be in November. Thank you so much. See you later.
Cheers.
Thank you. Please.
All righty. Bye, everybody.
Take care now.
Bye.